What if the quiet lines you've loved for years were not just elegant turns of phrase but windows into a life that has been quietly wrestling? Hit subscribe and ring the bell now so you get first-hand updates on this story and more as it unfolds. When Jonathan McReynolds' mother stepped into the light to speak about her son, the moment shifted how many people hear his songs. For years, fans and commentators listened for the craft, the lovely melodies, the graceful phrasing, the theological clarity, but also for something more fragile, the small admissions of doubt, the exhausted refrains, the repeated confessions that seemed to return like tide. Her public confirmation, however you choose to label it, put a human face on those recurring lines and gave listeners a new way to listen. To understand why that matters, we need to trace three connected lines. First, how public testimony works in gospel music. Second, how McReynolds' particular style had already invited this kind of close reading. And third, how a mother's voice functions differently from a PR statement. Gospel has always operated in a hybrid space between music and testimony. Songs double as testimony because they both lift praise and narrate personal change. When a singer tells a story about being lifted out of a valley, listeners assume the valley once existed. When singers offer unsettled lines, "I don't know, I'm tired, I keep returning to the same fight," those lines read differently in a genre where personal testimony carries theological weight. McReynolds' music had long occupied the honest, in-between place, not anthemic victory music alone, not purely lament either, but songs that sit with questions and name vulnerability as part of spiritual life. That posture made people attentive to details in his wording. It also made his music a natural target for speculation when no clarifying context existed. That lack of context is why his mother's words landed like a sudden, clarifying chord. A parent often holds the long view of a life in ways publicists cannot. Mothers remember late-night prayers, the moments when a young artist walked back into a quiet home after touring, the way doubt looked in private when it did not show on stage. When a mother chooses to speak publicly, she's not offering a marketing angle, she's often offering a witness formed across decades of caregiving, discipline, and intimate knowledge. Her confirmation reframed certain songs not merely as artful reflections but as elements of a lived arc, songs that had functioned as both music and survival language. For listeners, this reframing is not merely biographical trivia. It reshapes the emotional purchase of the songs. Verses that once felt like clever devices now feel like survival notes, and choruses that once read as aesthetic choices now bear the weight of testimony. At the same time, it's essential to hold two truths, that music is art and that art can grow from experience. Whether every line maps directly to an event in private life or whether McReynolds used composite language to translate feeling into melody does not erase the fact that the music served as companion for many. And when a family member supplies context, it alters not only how the music is heard but how the community thinks about vulnerability in gospel. Jonathan McReynolds rose by blending gospel tradition with an unusually intimate, contemporary voice, and that artistic identity explains why listeners reacted so strongly when his private life came under scrutiny. Unlike artists whose stage persona is a carefully managed projection, McReynolds built a career from songs that read like slightly open doors, music that invites you in rather than invites you to watch. His early work, recorded with modest resources and circulated to an audience hungry for honest theology, presented an artist who favored conversational syntax over sermonizing rhetoric. That approach broadened his reach. Congregants appreciated the theological depth, younger audiences connected with the soul-inflected phrasing, and critics noticed a songwriter who valued nuance over spectacle. But there is a cost to that style. When your artistic signature is candidness, audiences begin to assume that candidness extends beyond the music box. Listeners who found solace in his lines naturally wanted to know where those lines came from. Was the ache in a bridge a lyrical device, or was it a literal echo of nights spent wrestling with doubt? That question, innocuous in many musical genres, is combustible in gospel because songs often double as testimony. Add to that the fact that McReynolds intentionally guarded aspects of his private life. He did not live his biography for public consumption, and the result is a narrative vacuum. Humans dislike vacuums, we fill them. In McReynolds' case, fans filled the silence with affectionate curiosity and, at times, with rumor. The mother's confirmation therefore did more than satisfy curiosity, it supplied a moral and emotional context in which those candid songs can now be heard with fresh depth. Importantly, we should resist simplistic translations. An artist's guarded home life does not mean the music is a literal diary line by line, but when a family member testifies that certain themes reflect real struggle, it invites listeners to treat the songs as testimony shaped by experience. That recognition changes not only how we interpret the songs but also how we think about pastoral responsibility, fan compassion, and the expectations placed on visible ministers. Take the songs themselves, Cycles, People, and others that have become touchstones for McReynolds' audience, and listen to how vulnerability is staged musically and lyrically. These are not polished confessionals that resolve neatly at the end of 3 minutes. They linger in unresolved textures, cadences that trail off, harmonies that don't rush to tidy closure. Cycles uses musical repetition to mirror the emotional repetition it describes, the same fight returning, the fatigue of relapse, the slow labor of change. People interrogates relational expectation and the cost of being looked upon as an exemplar rather than a person. When the mother publicly connected those lyrical threads to lived stress, listeners rewired the song's emotional register. Lines that once functioned as universal statements about the human condition acquired a personal specificity, metaphors became footprints. The musical choices on these tracks, sparse arrangements, space around the vocal, the intimacy of vocal timbre, accentuate that sense of personal testimony. Production that leaves room for breath allows vulnerability to register more starkly than tightly produced pop anthems, and McReynolds often opts for that vulnerable space. That artistic choice makes the songs feel like conversations at a kitchen table, and when a close family member contextualizes the content, the kitchen table quality becomes a confession booth for many listeners. This is why the mother's revelation affects not only how fans parse the lyrics but how worship leaders, pastors, and industry professionals think about set lists and ministry narratives. Keeping personal life private is a common choice for many public figures, and for McReynolds that decision shaped the public's approach to his music long before his mother spoke. Privacy protected family, preserved sacred spaces, and allowed the artist to control what he wanted to make public. But silence can also become a narrative driver. When an artist's lyrics are unusually candid and the artist refuses to narrate his life's details, audiences begin to fill in blanks with intimate speculation. In McReynolds' case, decades of devoted listening meant the fanbase had built a deep emotional relationship with his music, and with that intimacy came a hunger for context. Fans began to look for clues, offhand comments in interviews, the particular way a chorus was delivered, a fleeting social media post. That kind of close listening is often affectionate, but it can also be intrusive, turning loyal admiration into investigatory zeal. The modern online environment accelerates these behaviors. Clips are clipped, conversations are condensed into shareable images, and AI tools can fabricate convincing but false images and audio. Indeed, McReynolds himself publicly cautioned followers about AI-generated videos and manipulated content that misrepresented his life, an important reminder that not every viral claim is grounded in verified truth. When privacy meets digital rumor mills, the results can be messy and damaging. For the artist, having a parent publicly confirm private struggles may alleviate some rumor pressure by offering a trustworthy source of context. For the audience, however, it also forces a reckoning. Do we accept that vulnerability as part of leadership, or do we double down on expecting public figures to be perfectly composed? The age of synthetic media complicates any conversation that depends on testimony and verification. Viral clips, short-form sensational videos, and AI-manipulated content have transformed how quickly and widely stories spread, and they complicate the job of anyone trying to keep facts straight. In this controversy, many of the most dramatic videos circulating on social platforms come from channels that prioritize views over verification. Some are repackaged clips stitched together to create a more explosive impression. Those packages can be persuasive, and they often outpace sober corrections. McReynolds' team publicly warned audiences not to trust certain AI-generated videos that claim to show events or statements that never occurred. That public advisory matters because it turned what might have been read as a straightforward family confirmation into a more complicated media moment, part genuine witness, part viral spectacle, and part potential disinformation. The stakes are high. When manipulated content circulates, reputations can be harmed irrevocably before verifiers can issue corrections. For family members who choose to go public, the pressure to be clear and careful is immense, and for journalists and content creators, the ethical duty to verify sources becomes even more urgent. Industry insiders reports about backstage tensions, scheduling changes, and reputation management surfaced quickly after the mother's comments and the wider controversy. Promoters, festival organizers, and church event directors operate at the intersection of ministry, business, and pastoral responsibility, so when stories of interpersonal conflict or reputational risk emerge, decision-makers often respond quietly and pragmatically. Some organizers reportedly adjusted lineups or separated artists to reduce the chance of public friction, others reassessed. Out of this moment come concrete calls for reform. Churches, festivals, and sponsors are being urged to strengthen contractual safeguards, to adopt clearer investigation protocols, and to partner with independent bodies for fair review when allegations arise. Some organizations are already experimenting with new processes, vetting panels that include laypeople and clergy, clauses in performance contracts that require mediation pathways, and pastoral care teams tasked with supporting both accusers and the accused. These efforts reflect a growing recognition that the old way, quiet negotiation and private settlements, often leaves harm unresolved and trust deteriorated. Structural change is never easy, it requires money, courage, and institutional will. But the alternative, continuing to default to secrecy, risks repeating the same patterns that lead to scandal. The gospel world has a real opportunity here. By designing transparent, humane systems for accountability, it can model restorative justice that does not retreat into shame nor quicken into punitive spectacle. Doing so would honor both the vulnerability of artists who struggle and the claims of those who speak up. What remains clear at the end of this long passage is that the mother's confirmation, however one interprets the full circumstances, has changed the conversation. Jonathan McReynolds' music will not sound the same to many listeners. Those intimate lines now carry the added weight of family testimony. More importantly, this episode exposes structural tensions in the gospel ecosystem, the pressure to present polished testimony, the temptation to prioritize image over accountability, and the urgent need for processes that balance truth-telling with pastoral care. Authenticity in gospel and in ministry does not require public perfection, it requires practices that treat human fragility honestly while protecting dignity. Verified reporting and careful verification remain essential in an era of manipulated media, and institutions must step up with transparent protocols that do not default to cover-ups or chaos. Fans must resist the urge to convict or absolve in viral minutes and instead insist on processes that center both evidence and compassion. If the gospel community can learn from this moment, if it can move toward structures that allow difficult truths to surface safely, then the painful publicity may produce something healing. A culture where leaders can be honest about struggle and where accountability and restoration are practiced not as opposite poles but as complementary disciplines. For now, the story continues to unfold. Keep watching, but demand verification, care, but demand fairness, and above all, remember that the songs that have ministered to people for years often come from real lives that deserve both empathy and truthful attention.